This is entitled The Samaritans. Who are they? Many people have heard of them and their exploits. Even if you haven't opened the Bible in your life, you would have heard the term the Good Samaritan. If you Google Samaritan, you will see an almost infinite amount of references in articles and videos. There is a lot about them in the secular sources. But did you know that the Bible has documented them extensively since they first arrived in the so-called land of Israel during the 8th century BC to their dwindling existence in the state of Israel, present-day Middle East? In spite of all the biblical documentation that I am attesting to, the rest of the world and themselves have different ideas about their origin and history, and much of these information they have about themselves can be gleaned from their holy book, the Samaritan Pentateuch, and their written history and customs. Therefore, somebody is lying, and it is not the Bible. For example, Wikipedia. Samaritans claim they are Israelite descendants of the northern tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh, who survived the destruction of the kingdom of Israel, Samaria, by the Assyrians in 722 BC. But some modern and ancient sources like Josephus, Talmud, Midrash, and other ancient scholars have theorized and have picked up and expanded on. Later in modern history, much of this has been coalesced into what we now hear about the Samaritans, with no one doing any fact-checking. And there's more about them. We read from the Encyclopedia Britannica. The Samaritan, member of a community of Jews, now nearly extinct, that claims to be related by blood to those Jews of ancient Samaria who were not deported by the Assyrian conquerors of the kingdom of Israel in 722 BC. The Samaritans call themselves Ben Yisrael, children of Israel, or Shamerim, observant ones. Their sole norm of religious observance is the Pentateuch, first 5 books of the Old Testament. Yet there is another. This is coming from the Blue Letter Bible, a document a lot of Hebrew Israelites like to reference. It says, the Samaritans were a group of people who lived in Samaria, an area north of Jerusalem. They were half Jews and half Gentiles. When Assyria captured the northern kingdom of Israel in 721 BC, some were taken in captivity while others left behind. The ones left behind intermarried with the Assyrians. Thus, these people were neither fully Hebrews nor fully Gentiles. And yet still, here's another. This one is coming from the Catholic Answers. You think they know better. But it says, the Samaritans were people who lived in what had been the northern kingdom of Israel. Samaria, the name of that kingdom's capital, was located between Galilee in the north and Judea in the south. The Samaritans were a racially mixed society with Jewish and pagan ancestry. Although they worshipped Yahweh, as did the Jews, their religion was not mainstream Judaism. They accepted only the first 5 books of the Bible as canonical, and their temple was on Mount Gerizim instead of on Mount Zion in Jerusalem. This study shows that there is only one source of truth. This study will use the Bible alone to show that all of the previously mentioned statements are outright lies and falsehood. But the single most thing I want the study to bear out is that the Bible is the only reliable source of truth, and those seeking the God of truth can only find Him in His Word, the Bible. You must not seek Him from books of man, including Apocryphal, Talmud, Josephus, encyclopedias, etc. Another interesting observation that is borne out by this study is how the enemies of Israel has long sought to insert themselves into our identity. Everybody so much want to be Israel, but alas, Israel want to be anything but to be Israel. The Samaritans today. Let's talk a little about them as they are today. They were reputed to have up to 1 million people at some point, but their numbers have diminished throughout the years. Today's population, 820, and that was in 219 they took that. Most of them reside in the state of Israel, mainly in Holland. In 2017, there was 415 of them in Holland, apparently. And in 2017 also, there was another 381 in Mount Gerizim. Their religion is called Samaritanism, and their holy book, the Samaritan Pentateuch, apparently a modified text of the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, written in the Samaritan alphabet and used as scripture by them. It constitutes their entire biblical canon, but they are known to possess a book of Joshua. That's interesting. Of course, this is based upon the Tanakh's book of Joshua, but Samaritans regard it as a non-canonical secular historical chronicle. Now, still on the subject of their Pentateuch, it says some 6,000 differences exist between the Samaritan and the Masoretic text. Interesting. This is like speaking about comparing apples and oranges. But I am not going to do that today because that is a whole different study. It says here these involve significant semantic changes, such as the uniquely Samaritan commandment to construct an altar on Mount Gerizim. The Samaritans believe that since more than 3,600 years ago, they came to live on Mount Gerizim because Moses, in his 10th commandment, ordered them to protect it as a sacred mountain and worship on it. This is out of the Wikipedia. That's kind of interesting because we know that the Masoretic text has been very much compromised through the years, and that's a text of none other than the King James Bible. So at least this commandment to build worship on Mount Gerizim is not in the Masoretic text. So you can imagine how flawed and worthless this Samaritan Pentateuch is. Anyway, moving on. This is what the Pentateuch looked like. This picture was around 1903, still in school form. I think by now they should have had a book form. Interestingly enough, a copy of this turned up, or parts of it turned up in the Dead Sea Scrolls. That's what it looked like in 1903. There might be a newer version. Yeah, this might be a newer version, except that it is, I think it's more recent though. That's about when they have color photos, so maybe that's why it's in color form here. Now, the best source of information about the Samaritans must come from their written customs. I think it's called Chronicle 2, and their holy book, the Samaritan Pentateuch. I will admit right off the bat that I never read any of them, nor will I ever attempt to read it. But I urge the readers to visit Samaritan sources, and that's the address, the web address here. Now let's get to it. Let us examine some of their most venerable claims in the light of the Bible truth. Now, this is one of the most important claims that they have made about themselves. It says the Samaritans claim they are Israelite descendants of the northern Israelite tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh, who survived the destruction of the kingdom of Israel, Samaria, by the Assyrians in 722 BCE. But these are the facts as reported by the Word of God. We first hear about the Samaritans in the Bible around 722 BC. It all started with the dissolution of the state of the northern kingdom of Israel by the Assyrians. The Assyrians ascended into Israel, and King Menahem paid a bribe, and Israel became a vassal state of Assyria. We read that in 2 Kings 15, 19 to 20. In his days, Pul, king of the Assyrians, ascended upon the land, and Menahem gave to Pul 1,000 talents of silver for his hands to be with him, to strengthen his kingdom in his hand. And Menahem brought forth the silver for Israel, excised upon every mighty man in strength, to give to the king of the Assyrians 50 shekels for the one man. And the king of the Assyrians returned and did not station there in the land. So that showed that the actual Assyrian assault on the northern tribes started in the time of King Menahem, who reigned in Israel around 750 BC. They basically became a vassal state of Assyria and had to pay tribute to Assyria. Thereafter, things got from bad to worse for Israel. The general sequence of events unfolded like this. In 740 BCE, Pekahiah apparently murdered Menahem and reigned in his stead. You can find that in 2 Kings 15, 20 to 23. 2 years later, in 738 BCE, Pekah killed him and began to reign. That's in 2 Kings 15, 32 to 33. 19 years later, in 718 BCE, Hosea killed Pekah and reigned in his stead. That's 2 Kings 15:30. Now King Hosea was the man. He was where it all started to end up for Israel. He was the beginning of the end for Israel, so to speak. We read that here in 2 Kings 17:3. Against him there ascended Shalmaneser, king of the Assyrians, and Hosea became to him as a servant, and he bore gifts to him. Well, at some point in his reign, the Assyrians came up against him. They made an agreement with him that he would pay tribute and the Assyrians would stay away from him. But King Hosea broke the agreement with the king of Assyria and was captured and imprisoned there. As we read here in 2 Kings 17:4. And the king of the Assyrians found a plot by Hoshea, for Hoshea sent messengers to So, that's his name, So, king of Egypt, and he did not bring gifts to the king of the Assyrians year by year. And the king of the Assyrians assaulted him and tied him up in the house of the prison. But Hoshea, being a wicked man, had abandoned the agreement, stopped sending tribute, and secretly made a deal with So, king of Egypt. He, So, would probably assist him with troops to withstand any impending assault by the Assyrians. But things did not exactly turn out as Hoshea has planned. Somebody may have snitched on King Hoshea. He was captured and imprisoned. That's probably in Samaria or somewhere in the outlying Israel areas, or probably even in Assyria. Then we read the following. So we read in 2 Kings 17:5, and the king of the Assyrians ascended unto all the land, and ascended unto Samaria, and assaulted it for 3 years. The Assyrians came into all the land of the northern tribes, and in its capital Samaria in particular. But even though Hoshea was captured, the organs of state persisted, because it took at least 3 years for the Assyrians to finally capture Samaria in 709 BC. And that was the end of the northern state of Israel. Because we read here in 2 Kings 17:6, in the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of the Assyrians seized Samaria, and he resettled Israel into Assyria, and he settled them in Halah and in Habor, the rivers of Gozan, in the mountains of the Medes. And now this is a very important verse, because this is where a lot of people start getting things wrong about Egypt, about Assyria and Israel being settled into Assyria. But let's move on. This verse has spawned many tales and myths, including the one about the 10 lost tribes of Israel. This, however, is false, whether concocted by the Gentiles or the Hebrew Israelites of today using the apocryphal book 2nd Esdras. Israel in the Bible means the sons of Israel. It's not a country in the Bible. It's not a country. Never refer to a country. It's the sons of Israel, the people of Israel. They were never exiled into Assyria, nor were they taken to West Africa. And that's a fact. We will see more later. You see, this myth would take another post to explain. I will do that in an upcoming post. But this verse is basically speaking about the dissolution of the state of the northern kingdom of Israel. The organs of state had been put in the hands of the Assyrians. They simply became a part of the Assyrian Empire. It would be a logistic nightmare. That's impossible for the Assyrians to take 4 million Israelites with them to Assyria. People are just not reading this and the other verses correctly. But the facts are, the Assyrians did exile out of Samaria some of the sons of Israel to several lands, including Habor, Hela, areas close to the river Gozan, etc. But that is exactly what the verse says above. The Assyrian records concur with the Bible that they exiled 27,290 people from Samaria only. This would be military, civil, religious, and business leaders basically. Yeah, that's how it goes those days. They don't take the riffraffs, just the important people. But all the sons of Israel stayed put up to the time of the Messiah. That's a fact. Ahead is our first introduction to the Samaritans, the people of today depicted in the earlier pictures that live in the state of Israel. There are some commentators that think these people were Hamites. I think they were a mixed Hamites and Japhetite. But whomever they are, the Bible is clear that they are not the sons of Israel, because we read the following. We read 2 Kings 17:24. And the king of the Assyrians led from out of Babylon, the one from out of Cuta, and from out of Ava, and from out of Amat, and Sepharvaim, and settled them in the cities of Samaria instead of the sons of Israel. See, I put that in bold. And they inherited Samaria, and they settled in its cities. Comment. The Assyrians took people from their empire, namely from Babylon, Cuta, Ava, Hamath, Sepharvaim. There is no shadow of doubt that these are Gentiles now settled into parts of lands that the people of Israel once occupied. They were settled in Samaria and its cities, towns. But they are Gentiles, not blood Israelites as shown by the above verse. One can only be a son of Israel only if your parents are sons of Israel. And by that I mean woman and man. You cannot become a son of Israel by virtue of living in the land they once occupied. If that is not convincing enough, listen the words of Yeshua some 750 years later. Yeshua reinforced the fact that the Samaritans are not sons of Israel. Luke 17:12-18. And of his entering into a certain town, there met with him 10 leprous men, which stood at a distance. And they lifted their voice, saying, Jesus, Master, show mercy on us. And one of them, beholding that he was healed, returned with a great voice glorifying God. And he fell upon his face by his feet, giving thanks to him. And he was a Samaritan. And responding, Jesus said, Were there not 10 cleansed? But where are the 9? Were there not found any returning to give glory to God except this foreigner? Did you see what Yeshua referred to this Samaritan as? this foreigner. He is not an Israelite as the other 9 lepers. This idea that the Samaritans are the people of Israel is totally repudiated. But let us examine their ancestral roots a little more. We can examine the Samaritan relationship, if any, to the sons of Israel or to the God of Israel. We further read in 2 Kings 17:25. And it came to pass in the beginning of their place of sitting down, they did not fear the Lord, and the Lord sent among them lions, and they were being killed by them. This is talking about the Samaritans. The Greek word for fear, that's G5399, or the Hebrew equivalent H3372, conveys the same meaning. It is basically saying that they were not afraid of the God of Israel. He does not frighten them. They do not have respect for him. Basically, that's the same thing as the people of today. They continued with their same idolatrous practices that they took from their former homeland. But quickly he got their attention by sending lions to kill them. So many Samaritans have been killed by a lion, but not so the children of Israel. We read here in 2 Kings 17:26, they need a solution for this. Here we read, and they said to the king of the Assyrians, saying, the nation which you resettled and relocated in the cities of Samaria, they know not the distinguishing manner of the God of the land. And he sent to them lions, and behold, they are killing them, insofar as they do not know the distinguishing manner of the God of the land. So somebody came up on a solution. To fix this, they believe they need to bring back one of the priests of the sons of Israel, whom they had taken out of Samaria and resettled into Assyria. Notice something important here. The priest they brought back would not have been a legit priest or even a Levite. Around 782 BC, King Jeroboam had initiated false worship for Israel. During this time, the northern kingdom had completely turned their back on the God of Israel, because we read in 1 Kings 12:26-32. And Jeroboam said in his heart, behold, now the kingdom shall return to the house of David, if this people should ascend to offer a sacrifice in the house of the Lord in Jerusalem. Then the heart of the people shall turn toward their master, to Rehoboam king of Judah, and they shall kill me. And the king consulted and made 2 heifers of gold. And he said to the people, let it be enough for you to ascend to Jerusalem. Behold your gods, O Israel, the ones leading you from out of the land of Egypt. And he put the one in Bethel, and the other one he put in Dan. And this account came to pass for sin. And the people went after the one unto Dan. And he made houses upon high places, and he appointed priests from any part of the people who were not the sons of Levi. And Jeroboam made a holiday feast in the 8th month, on the 15th day of the month, according to the holiday, the one in Judah. And he ascended unto the altar which he made in Bethel, to sacrifice the heifers which he made. And he placed in Bethel the priests of the high places which he made. Now back to the Samaritans and their problems. We read in 2 Kings 17:28, and they bought one of the priests which they resettled from Samaria, and he settled in Bethel. And he was enlightening them how they should fear the Lord. Obviously they put For their solution, they put this calf worshipping priest to live in Bethel. Bethel was the seat of the calf worshipping religion that Jeroboam has instituted in Israel hundreds of years earlier. Second Kings 17:29. And nation by nation were making their gods, and they put them in the house of the high places, which the Samaritans made, nation by nation, in the cities which they dwelt. You may have missed it, but this is the first time the Samaritans are revealed as Gentiles, non-Israelites. Now Israel, observe, this is where we encounter the word Samaritans for the very first time in the Bible. In the King James Version, it is H8118. Right here in 2 Kings chapter 17 verse 29, the God of Israel is making the determination for posterity as to whom the Samaritans are. They are not the sons of Israel. They are Gentiles who want to be Israel. They also have no spiritual relationship to the God of Israel. They are Gentile idolaters. And God continued to make the distinction between Samaritans and Israel. Each of these nations made their own national gods whom they worship. We read here in 2 Kings 17:30-31. And the men of Babylon made Succoth Benoth, and the men of Put made Nergal, and the men of Hamath made Ashima, and the Abites made Nibhaz and Tartek, and the Sepharvites incinerated their sons by fire to Adramelech and Anamelech, gods of the Sepharvaim. They worship their own ancestral gods and not the God of Israel. 2 Kings 17:32-33. And they were fearing the Lord, and they made for themselves priests of the high places, and they offered for themselves in the house of the high places. They were fearing the Lord, and they served their gods, according to the distinguishing manner of the nations from where he resettled them from there. You see, they were being taught well by the idolatrous priests from the sons of Israel that was sent among them. They made themselves priests of the high places and did offerings and sacrifices. Believe they can serve and worship God. All they were doing was serving their gods as they were accustomed to. 2 Kings 17:34-35. Until this day, they do according to their distinguishing manner. They are not fearing the Lord, and they do not do according to their ordinances, and according to their judgment, and according to the law, and according to the commandment which the Lord gave charge to the sons of Jacob, of whom he established his name Israel. And the Lord ordained with them a covenant, and he gave charge to them, saying, You shall not fear other gods, and you shall not do obeisance to them, and you shall not serve them, and you shall not sacrifice to them. Now you have to be very careful how you read this. Here God has reintroduced the sons of Israel as a reference. Yes, these people have instituted a religious system, but it is quite unlike the ordinances, and according to their judgment, and according to the law, and according to the commandment which the Lord gave charge to the sons of Jacob, in whom he established his name Israel. And the Lord ordained with them, that is the sons of Israel, a covenant, and he gave charge to them, the sons of Israel, saying, You shall not fear other gods. And again, be careful here as well, because God is referencing the sons of Israel only in the next chapter, in the next verse. Listen to it carefully. 2 Kings 17:36-40. For only to the Lord who led you from out of the land of Egypt with great strength and with a high arm, him you shall fear, and to him you shall do obeisance, and to him you shall sacrifice, and his ordinances, and the judgment and commandments, and the law which he wrote for you, you shall guard to do all the days, and you shall not fear other gods. And the covenant which he ordained with you, you shall not forget, and you shall not fear other gods. For only the Lord your God, him you shall fear, and he will rescue you from the hands of your enemies. And they hearken not, but only in their former ordinances they act. Now here God moves from the idolatrous Israelite back to the idol-worshipping Gentile Samaritans. We read 2 Kings 17:41. And these nations were fearing the Lord, and they served to their carvings, even indeed their sons, and the sons of their sons. They do as did their fathers unto this day. But until today, they continue to worship their idols of their forefathers, and that's a fact. Even today in the 21st century, the Samaritans still worship the gods of their forefathers. There was and still is a big difference between the Samaritans of that time and their contemporary neighbors, the sons of Israel. The sons of Israel were idolatrous in the most part, but their descendants have a covenant relationship with the God of Israel. The descendants of the Samaritans do not have a covenant relationship with God. The best they can do today is to try to steal the identity of Israel. Unfortunately for them, that will not cut it. Yes, according to the Samaritan tradition, Mount Gerizim was the original holy place of the Israelites from the time that Joshua conquered Canaan and the tribes of Israel settled the land. You can find that in Wikipedia. Or that's where I just read it. The big problem with this claim is that it is transparently false. Firstly, any Gentile who are ever remotely familiar with the Bible can show you that Jerusalem is where God commanded Israel to worship, as we have covered earlier. But I would like to humor this a little bit. Earlier I showed that the Samaritans did not appear until 709 BC, while Israel came into the land of Canaan in 1407 BC, nearly 700 years earlier. Therefore, this is apparently a made-up fairy tale. We read here in Deuteronomy 11:29. Then it will be whenever the Lord your God should bring you into the land into which you pass over there to inherit it, then you shall give the blessing upon Mount Gerizim and the curse upon Mount Ebal. Deuteronomy 27:4. And it will be as whenever you should pass over the Jordan, you shall set these stones which I gave charge to you today on Mount Ebal, and you shall whitewash them with lime. Joshua 8:30. Then Joshua built an altar to the Lord God of Israel on Mount Ebal. Therefore, the altar was built on Mount Ebal and not Gerizim. Here again I'm quoting from Wikipedia. Samaritan historiography places the basic schism from the remaining part of Israel after the tribes of Israel excuse me, conquered and returned to the land of Canaan, led by Joshua. In its account, after Joshua's death, Eli the priest left the tabernacle which Moses erected in the desert and established on Mount Gerizim, and built another one under his own rule in the hills of Shiloh. Of course, this has no basics in fact. In 1407 BC, Israel came into Canaan. Eli died 1068 BC. Eli would have been 340 years old when he died, according to their system. This is impossible. When Joshua died, Israel was led by judges. The first two may have been Ehud and Shamgar. Eli was not a judge until 260 years later. Eli never did any such thing the Samaritans are claiming. Thank you. So, we have already seen that the Samaritans have never worshipped the God of Israel from their inception to this very day. We also saw that they are not of Israel, but rather Gentiles. But what about this claim that they are half Jew? SIC, I put that there because that's what they are quoting. There is no such thing as Jew. And half Gentile. The Catholic answers are among the numerous sources that make this claim. So this is what the Catholic answers say. The Samaritans were a racially mixed society with Jewish and pagan ancestry. Although they worshipped Yahweh as did the Jews, their religion was not mainstream Judaism. They accepted only the first 5 books of the Bible as canonical, and their temple was on Mount Gerizim instead of Mount Zion in Jerusalem. Catholic answers. Well, the Catholic answers can say anything they want, but of course the Samaritans themselves have no such tradition. They claim they are actually full Israelites from the tribe of Ephraim and Manasseh. The fact is that is nonsense. And they may have gotten these ideas from misunderstanding or misrepresenting the Bible. It is never easy to determine where these myths and legends got started. But here we read in Ezra 9, 1-2. And as these things were finished, the rulers approached to me, saying, the people of Israel did not separate, and the priests and the Levites from the peoples of the lands in their abomination. Of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the Ammonites, the Moabites, and the Mozerites, and the Amorite. For they took of their daughters to themselves and to their sons, and the holy seed mixed together among the people of the lands, even by the hand of the rulers and of the commandants in this breach of contract in rule. Now, if this is what they are referring to, it is totally false. Notice the nation mentioned here does not include Samaritans. They are Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the Ammonites, the Moabites, and the Mozerites, and the Amorites. Furthermore, in the case of these nations, they had remedied that situation. All the men transgressing was ordered to divorce their foreign daughters and send them away with the children they bore. You can read that in Ezra 10, 1 to 44. Also, they could have built this myth up from an incident described in Nehemiah 13, 23 to 31. But one quick note that the only foreign nation referenced here are Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab. Now that particular verse reads like this. Nehemiah 13 to 23. And in those days I saw the Jews who settled with wives of Ashdod, of Ammon, and Moab. But in that case, Nehemiah apparently fixed that. So in Nehemiah 13:30, we also read, and I cleansed them from all aliens and appointed watches to the priests and the Levites, each one to his work. And yet another mixed Jew hypothesis origin. This one is pure conjecture. This occurs from the spurious association of the name Sanballat, the Horonite, with the Samaritans, and that appears in Nehemiah 4:2. And he, Sanballat, spoke before his brethren and the forces of the Samaritans, and he said, what do these Judah men do? The Jews, shall we not abandon them? Is it to sacrifice? Is it that they will be able to? And today will they repair the stones with the embankment rubbish for being burnt? Now a little on this name Sanballat. The name Sanballat appears only in the book of Nehemiah. On the other hand, the word Samaritans only appear in the Old Testament 2 times, 2 Kings 17:29 and Nehemiah 4:2. In Nehemiah 4:2, each time it is rendered as the force of the Samaritans, the army of the Samaritans, the multitude of the Samaritans. This is telling you that the Samaritans was present in numbers. Yet historians and Christian scholars use this to make the erroneous connection that Sanballat the Horonite is a Samaritan when he is not. Yes, from that verse also you can see that the nations that were in contention with the men of Judah in the time of Nehemiah were Horonites, Ammonites, Arabians, Ashdodites, and Samaritans. Apparently at the time of this confrontation, there was the Horonites, Samaritans, and Ammonites. The problem for this theory is that Sanballat was a Moabite, not a Samaritan. We will use the Brown Driver's Briggs definition to show this. So there it is, the Brown Driver Briggs definition. An Horonite equals a native of Oronim, an inhabitant of Oronim in Moab, the designation of Sanballat, the opponent of Nehemiah. But the historians would get it one step backward. After making the spurious association of Sanballat with the Samaritans, they went further to make another association of mixed marriage. Nehemiah 13:28. And from the sons of Joiada, Elishahab, the great priest, in-law to Sanballat the Horonite, even I threw him from me. See, it was Sanballat the Horonite who was doing that mixed marriage thing. Yes, there may have been a few intermarriages, but in this instance, the mixed marriages between a Moabite and an Israelite, not a Samaritan and an Israelite. But even the record shows it was no large-scale mixed marriage, and even when that happened, Ezra and Nehemiah ended it. But there was never a single recorded incident of mixed marriage among Samaritans and Israel in the Bible. So, did the Samaritan get their name from Samaria or vice versa? That is, the Samaria got their name from Samaritans, as a lot of historians like to say. Which is it? Now, this is so stupid, but according to Wikipedia, there is conflict over the etymology of the name for the Samaritans in Hebrew, stemming from the fact that they are referred to differently in different dialects of Hebrew. This has accompanied controversy over whether the Samaritans are named after the geographical area of Samaria, or whether the area received its name from the group. This distinction is controversial in part because different interpretations can be used to justify or deny claims of ancestry over this region, which has been deeply contested in modern times. So stupid, but let's get into it. Now, we already covered this fact. The fact is that the Samaritans got their name from Samaria, the capital of the northern tribes. Samaria existed from before they came there, obviously. Being dwellers of Samaria, they became Samaritans. Let us look at the origin of the word Samaria. The name originated in 1 Kings 16:24. And Omri acquired the mountain Samaria from Shemer, the lord of the mountain, for 2 talents of silver. And he built on the mountain, and he called the name of the mountain which he built upon after the name of Shemer, the lord of the mountain, Samaria. Therefore, according to the Bible, King Omri acquired a piece of mountainous land from a man called Shemer. Hebrew Shemer or Shamer or Shamed. The word for those are preserved. Omri named the city built on the land after the seller Shemer, Samaria. Hebrew Shomeran, equal watch mountain. One can clearly deduce from the original Hebrew name the intention of Omri when he built this city. He wanted this city to have security and being able to watch for incoming invaders. The Samaritans were taken to Samaria hundreds of years later and inherited the city and the name. There it is. Another error that has been making the rounds for several millenniums now, well, about 2 millenniums actually. The woman at the well near Sychar was a Samaritan. That is not true. She's an Israelite. Let us see. So here we read in John 4:6-7. And the spring of Jacob was there. Then Jesus, being tired from the journey, sat thus at the spring. It was about the 6th hour. There came a woman out of Samaria. And that term Samaria in the Greek is G4540, to draw water. Jesus said to her, "Give me to drink." To sort this out, we have to clear up some semantics. The word Samaria, Samaritans, etc. The key to understanding these sentences is to know how they are used in the context of the passage. Samaria, H8111, Hebrew. Samaria, the capital of the ancient northern Israelite state. Samaria, G4540, Greek. The region of Samaria created by the Romans during the time of Yeshua. The ancient capital of Samaria persisted through the time of Yeshua. Samaritan, G4541, Greek. This is particularly referring to an individual from that ethnic group called Samaritans. As I already showed you, they are not the sons of Israel. Also from the Taya, the word Samaritan could also mean an inhabitant of the city of Samaria and an inhabitant of the region of Samaria. Samaritans H811 Hebrew appear here the first time. This is an ethnic group. The group referenced in this study, again, they are not the sons of Israel. Samaritan G4541 Greek. This is the same word above, but is in the Greek language. Here it is only used in the plural sense. Now look at the map for the location of the city of Samaria, G4540. This is saying simply that this woman lives in a village or town called Sychar in the city of Samaria. That's it. Now look at the map. We see Samaria, Galilee, Judea, Perea, and Decapolis. These are the regions that the Romans created during the time of Yeshua. But if you look further down, you see the city Samaria, and further down you see the village or town Sychar. That's where the woman comes from. That's where the woman lives. So therefore, she is used in that context. She's a Samaritan. So don't get fooled. We read here in John 4:9. Then the Samaritan, that is G4542, woman says to him, "How do you, being a Jew, ask from me to drink, being a Samaritan woman? For Jews do not have dealings with Samaritans." That's G4541. I can understand how difficult that is to the general reader, because it is quite difficult, but it's gonna be sorted out. So this woman, identified so far as a woman from out of the city of Samaria, says to Yeshua, "How do you, being a Jew?" means she's misidentified Yeshua for some reason. Maybe because he's coming from Jerusalem. Yeshua is from the tribe of Judah, although he resides in Galilee for most of his life. You have to understand that the word Jew is very misleading. The word Jew is a fake and an insertion from the Masoretic Jews, who over the time during that period inserted and replaced the original word with Jew. In this context, she may be saying that Yeshua is a Judean or a man of Judea. Another issue is that the temple worship in Jerusalem is strongly associated with Judeans. Being a Samaritan woman, for Jews do not have dealings with the Samaritans, is saying she just acknowledged again that she is a woman who resides in the ancient city limits of Samaria, G4542. But the ancient city limits of Samaria have been associated with an ethnic group that is not Israelites. They are Gentile people called Samaritans. You have to understand that there was a long schism between these people, Samaritans, and the men of Judah about the proper place of worship and other doctrines. They worship in their temple in Mount Gerizim, and the Israelites worship in Jerusalem. The Israelites in Galilee and Samaria still travel to Jerusalem to worship at the temple. There are also some racial aspects of the division. The Judeans do not regard the Samaritans as Israelites, obviously, and rightly so. They were planted there by the Assyrians hundreds of years ago. As a quick aside, here's Yeshua showing you that the sons of Israel and the Samaritans live near each other in the city of Samaria. Matthew 10:5-6. These 12 Jesus sent, exhorting them, saying, Unto the way of the nation you should not go forth, and unto the city of the Samaritans you should not enter, but you go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. This is indicating that Yeshua fully acknowledged that the sons of Israel and the Samaritans live near each other in the city of Samaria. See the map again. Israel lived all over the provinces of Samaria and Galilee and Judea. Getting back into the original point. Apparently the ethnic group called Samaritans do not allow anyone to pass through their territory to Jerusalem, only from Jerusalem towards them. We read in Luke 9:51-53. As the time approached for him to be taken up to heaven, Jesus resolutely set out for Jerusalem, and he sent messengers on ahead who went into a Samaritan village to get things ready for him. But the people there did not welcome him because he was heading to Jerusalem. Now, this is the final proof that the woman of Sychar is an Israelite. John 4:12. Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave to us this well, and himself drank from it, and his sons and his livestock? Now, if you doubted this woman's ethnicity, John 4:20 is proof that she is an Israelite. If a Samaritan made this statement, they would be lying. If Yeshua did not correct her, then you know she is telling the truth, that her forefather is Jacob. We read here in John 4:20. Our forefathers in this mountain did options, and you say that in Jerusalem is the place where it is necessary to do options. Her forefather, this is another place where people think this woman is a Samaritan. But listen, her forefathers are Israelites. They did false worship in those hills. They were commanded by God to worship in Jerusalem. Remember Jeroboam that we read about earlier on, and his religion that he instituted? She is just relating the experience of her ancestors, the 10 northern tribes, as they disobeyed God's words and suffered the awful consequences. Yes, I previously took some detours because we were talking about the word Jews, and I had to address the woman's nationality as the verses came up. But we going back to Jews now. John 4:22. Jesus saying that to her, you do options to whom you know not. We do options to whom we know, for deliverances of the Jews. Basically, this word Jews should be Judah, Judah men, Judahites. It's talking about the tribe of Judah. This verse is an overly complicated verse in the sense that it would take a whole different article to fully explain it. The complication arises from the replacement of the original word Judah, sometimes spelled J-U-D-A-H, with the word Jews. Judah is the name of one of the 12 tribes of Israel. This was replaced by the word Jews, by the Masoretic, as I was telling you earlier. The 12 tribes of Israel were transitioned into a physical nation by King David, who was himself from the tribe of Judah. After Solomon, his successor son, died, the nation was split into two different kingdoms. The northern kingdom took 10 tribes, and 2 tribes of Judah and Benjamin took the south. Hundreds of years later, the northern tribes lost their sovereignty, and the southern kingdom followed a couple hundred years later. But by God's sovereign will, the tribe of Judah was reinstated into a nation centered on Jerusalem some 70 years later. The Bible verse that ties this all together is the following. Genesis 49:10. A ruler shall not fail from Judah, and one leading from his thigh, until whenever should come the things reserved for him, and he is the expectation of the nations. So this is what Yeshua was saying when he said earlier that salvation is of the Jews. Well, that's not the word Jews, it's Judah, through him, the Messiah. Apparently, the woman understand, because here in John 4:25, she says, the woman says to him, I know that Messiah comes, the one being called Christ. Whenever he should come, that one will announce to us all things. You see, this woman recognized her Messiah. And the Samaritan cannot confess this. Their custom never spoke of a coming Messiah. This kind of thinking is arcane only to Israel. From their culture and custom, they know this. Continuing on, if an Israelite recognized the Messiah, we relate it to our brothers and sisters. As we read in John 4:29, this is the woman saying, after Christ told her about the husband she has, she says, come, see a man who told me all things as much as I did. Maybe this is the Christ? There is no Samaritan culture that speak of a Christ. This is what any true Israelites would do in this situation. She would tell her brothers and sisters of Israel about the good news. Therefore, this woman and the men of her village of Sychar are Israelites living in the vicinity of the ancient capital of Samaria. Thanks for watching this study.